rolling equity leasing.
I am
REL.
At REL, they're not just a leasing company.
We like to work with REL because
They seem to really care about us.
I am REL.
I am REL.
working with REL, it's a national company with a small town feel. REL.
REL.
I am REL.
I am REL.
I am REL.
We feel like we're working with friends. It's like you're having a beer with your buddy.
We are REL.
Hi, everybody. John Haldi here, and I'm delighted to have Tim Steiner with me. Tim, welcome.
Thank you.
Tim is the director of REL Solutions and a wealth of knowledge. And Tim, I would love to pick your brain today about parts. Is that cool?
Great subject. Let's do this, buddy.
Okay. I hear from a lot of TSPs that they keep a lot of parts on hand. What the heck does that mean? Wouldn't you just need parts when you take it to a dealer and you need repair work or to a local shop?
So when you're keeping parts on hand, that generally means that you're keeping a stock of parts that you can send out to different repair facilities. It's a great idea every once in a while, with high traffic parts, but you want to be cautious on overextending yourself and getting yourself into the lesser known parts that you may not use.
So give me an example of one that would be a common part that somebody might keep a stock of for a Volvo 860.
So with a Volvo 860, you might want to look at a wiper motor. That's, one of the more common things that have went off on those. There's some clamps that you'd want to keep on hand that are pretty universal. Certain things like that. Outside of that, it would depend based on what your fleet is, right? So if you have a bunch of, say, Volvo 860s, that's a very good opportunity for you to be able to stock parts because they're going to be interchangeable amongst all of your fleet. If you have a mixed fleet, you want to be very cautious of buying parts because they might not fit your entire fleet and you might not see that same repair again for a substantial period of time.
So let me dial it back because I'm still connecting the dots. I gotta ask you to dumb it down for me. So wiper motor, clamps, things like that. What about like fuses and wiper blades and simple things like that? Is that something that you might think about keeping extras of?
Yeah, you should always keep certain things within your truck. Fuses, light bulbs, oil, coolant. These are main things that you want to keep in that your driver can add. Depending on the skill of your driver, you can do more. If it's an airline on the backside from the tractor to the trailer, you might want to consider that. But if they're not inclined at all, I would keep it simple. Fuses, light bulbs, oils, fluids. These will very much help you avoid roadside situations that down you for an extended period of time and cost you multiple times the amount of money that a simple jug of oil would.
And when you keep parts in trucks, do you have to worry about the parts disappearing, or are drivers generally pretty good about leaving them in the box in the cab and only using them when they need them?
So it depends on exactly what the part is. If it's something like you said, like wiper blades, things like that, then hey, if your buddy needs it, might disappear because you might just give it out. If it's a larger part, then it's probably going to be pretty specific to that unit. It'll be a little bit harder for that to just kind of go away for you.
Okay. And would you ever keep parts back in your office and so that you can send it to your local shop when you need it, or would they typically always stay in the truck?
So that's kind of where we get into the makeup of the fleet, in my opinion. And this is where you want to kind of start to look at your parts situation a little bit more holistically. If you have a very light fleet, then yeah, to me, it would make a lot of sense to keep those parts on hand because you never know where your truck is going to go down, right? Say you have a fleet of 12 trucks and they're spread out across the nation. It might be a very common part, right? But there might have been, say, a recall or a campaign notification that now ate up the entire inventory. If you have your own stock, you can start to overcome these major parts down situations and by just sending out your part to any of your units. If you have a mixed fleet, that becomes very difficult because they're not going to be exchanged. You can't send out a wiper motor for a Volvo 860 and expect it to fit onto a Freightliner. You won't see those types of things happening.
So there's an insurance aspect of this for part shortages, that if you have certain things, you're not going to be sitting with a truck that should be back in a day, but it takes a week because it couldn't get a part.
Exactly. And there's a lot of different complications to it. If it's just transferring from one dealership to the next, you generally won't feel any sting other than an overnight shipping, similar to if you sent out the part yourself. It's those back order parts where there's no ETA, there's weeks at a time where they're not going to be found, or they will even give you an update. You can cut off a tremendous amount of downtime by having your own parts on hand.
What about cost? If I buy a wiper motor myself and I give it to the dealer and I don't know what a wiper motor costs, give me a ballpark.
Don't quote me on that one, brother. I'll get eaten alive.
Let's say it's a $300 part, okay, whatever it is. If the dealer or the local shop is sourcing it and marking it up and charging me, and it would have cost me $300 to buy it online with shipping, what am I going to save typically compared to the dealer or the local shop by having the part and giving it to them?
See, this is actually where you'll see a benefit, right? The local shop, it's kind of inverse dealership and local shop at this point, right? We generally see the dealership as a higher cost item and the local shop as a little bit of a discount. Whenever you're getting an OEM part, it's always going to be a little bit more expensive at the mom and pop shop, because they're going to have to buy that part from the dealership in order to put onto your truck anyhow. You know, they might have it in stock, but depending on the scope of what we're talking, if there's no third-party replacement, they're going to have to source that from the dealership. So the more you buy directly from the dealership, start to kind of spend money on these parts, you can then negotiate parts discounts as a total buying program. And you can feed that local shop your own parts off your own discount that you can then leverage on a national basis.
And if it's a non-OEM part, if it's something that you're comfortable buying, not from the manufacturer, but a third party, does the same economics work, or?
Nope, that's where we're back to kind of our general rule of thumb, where the local shop should be a little bit cheaper. And that's the benefit of getting these parts, right? Is they should be a little bit cheaper. There's a lot of different, things that you can swap out, airbags, shocks, there's a lot of stuff that you can go ahead and you can source that are very common, that have a lot of alternatives. And that's where you'll see lower cost at the mom and pop shop. The dealership are going to push their proprietary parts.
And again, back to the example, it's a $300 part that I can order online and get my hands on it. And then I go to the dealer and I didn't order it online. They order it online for $300. What's a typical local shop markup? 15%, 30%, 50%?
So probably about 30, it's a scale, right? So as the part gets more expensive, the percentage will drop. But what actually happens is that local dealership or that local mom and pop shop has a parts account with the dealership that they're leveraging, almost the same game that we're playing. So they'll buy it at a discount. It'll be less than what you can typically buy at list price at the dealership, but then they mark it up so it'll actually be more expensive. They have to do this for economic purposes just to kind of make the whole transaction work. But you can get ahead of these processes by setting up your own purchasing process and cultivating that relationship so you can continuously drive your parts costs down while feeding your local shop.
Is the part savings big enough that you recommend to TSPs that they find trucks they really like and try to standardize around the same make and model for that reason? Or is it, if you're lucky enough that you've standardized, then the part savings good? Which is the dog, which is the tail here?
Right. So there's two pieces with that. One, will the cost benefit be worth it? Absolutely. However, there's risk with it. If you're buying all of one OEM and you're getting all these parts, then any one part that goes on back order, you're at risk for across your fleet. If you have a mixed fleet, then you're only risking those units that fall within that parameter, right? So if you have, say, Freightliners and, Volvos, anything that goes on back order for the Volvos, you'll be at risk with, but your Freightliner, pipeline on parts might still be clean.
So here's an edge question. I visited a TSP, and in their yard, they had the carcass of an old truck. And they happened to have a garage, and they had basically been stripping that thing for parts because they, I think, had an accident and they got paid on the insurance and it was totaled or whatever, but there was a whole bunch of salvageable stuff.
Right on.
Do you see people doing that, or is that like Jedi tricks and you don't recommend people going there?
So that's getting a little bit advanced. But if you have your own shop, that's great for a multitude of reasons. One, there's a bunch of extra parts, right? If something comes in really broken, I can just go and snag it. not only that, I can then begin to test parts, right? And that's where you really start to see a lot of benefit with local shops or having your own, is if you can give them parts where they can test whether or not something's working, then it cuts down on a lot of diagnostics and other things like that. Hey, just change out this part that I believe it is. If it starts working, leave that used part on there, we'll go, or I'll just replace it with a new. Versus you running all these diagnostic pieces to understand whether or not this part has actually failed out as we thought. And
Okay,
there's a
but
lot to that, but
that's the small slice of TSPs who have their own shop and a mechanic they trust and all that kind of good stuff, right?
yes, sir. Absolutely. It is a very minor piece of our customers. We generally see that people who are much more reliant on these third-party shops, they don't really have the benefit of having their own facility.
Last question, because you went real fast past it before, but I remember talking to a TSP at a conference, I think in Dallas last year at the Line Hall Summit, and he was very passionate about how there's so many simple, basic things that a driver can do, but many of them have no clue. So they had actually created videos to teach them how to change a fuse, how to change oil, how to do, not change oil, but add oil, this kind of stuff. Do you recommend that people go that extra distance? Is there a source where these guys can learn these things that you could build a curriculum and say, hey, you're going to operate this truck, you should know how to do these 8 things in case it happens on the roadside?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there's individual guides within each OEM to where certain things are. But as a general rule, most of this stuff is on YouTube. These real minor things. You can find that knowledge anywhere. If I was a TSP, what I would do is each one of my new drivers, I would just walk them through the individual processes that we expect them to handle. Hey, here is how you change a fuse, right? Here is where you're going to add the oil. Here's where you're going to add the coolant when it's at this level, right? These are the individual things. This should all be part of the pre-trip, in my opinion, where they're doing the checks on your tires and those other cost-saving measures, right? That's where they should be spotting the lights out. They should be getting these minor things repaired ahead of time instead of you getting, hit with the DOT and all that found, or the repair escalated.
I don't know if anyone's done this, probably they have, but I would think that in that box with all those parts, if you put together a sheet and had it on a clipboard or laminated with QR codes that would take you to the videos that exist online on YouTube for how to do that, that would be an easy way for someone. Because if you teach me how to do all that stuff on the day I start and 8 months later a fuse goes, I ain't gonna remember any of that stuff.
That's actually one of the best ideas I've heard when it comes to training drivers like this. If you could give them just an easy, quick access, I mean, the result, right? Calling somebody to come out and fix this or repair this, or calling their dispatcher to say, hey, this is broken, is all just as bothersome as just being able to go to the video and fix it yourself and get on with your day. Especially if you pay your drivers by mileage, they'll be more and more incentivized to get that truck up and going and running.
Hell, I'd give them a cash bonus for doing it and save me a roadside assist.
Yeah, maybe give them a little repair fee or something.
But I don't want them telling me a light bulb went out every day.
Yeah, but that's part of the pre-trip. I would expect pictures and certain other things to make sure that all of my equipment's in, working appropriate order.
Tim, what have I not asked you that I should have asked you about parts?
One thing I think that we could probably talk about is that the OEM and your local shops are not the only places where you can buy parts. There are other people out there who work in these in-between programs. I know Napa has one. There's companies like Road Equipment, different things like that. When I worked at a shop, I actually had to buy these parts, so I would have to source these third-party parts. And there's retailers that peddle everything from slack adjusters to airbags to, general sheet metal. Find these guys that actually sell the parts to these places, and you can develop relationships with them too. And some of them are national, some of them are local. But there's other programs besides just, your local shop and the dealership.
What about used parts? Is that a thing in these tractors?
Absolutely. You want to be cautious on that, especially when you're dealing with anything in warranty. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have on documentation replacing used part that ends up having a catastrophic failure that leads to other things that could be covered under warranty, right? So while the truck's under warranty, I would generally stick with newer parts as often as possible just to avoid any complications. But as the truck ages and you move away from warranty, there's going to be a great opportunity to save a lot of money on parts by getting used parts. And it's also a great way to overcome those back order deficits that we talked about, is by sourcing used parts instead of waiting on the new back order part to come through.
Gotcha. Well, Tim, I can't thank you enough for your time sharing this wisdom on parts. Anybody watching, please email Tim or I with any other questions on anything having to do with truck love. Tim's graciously volunteered his time to educate all of us, so please take the opportunity to reach out to us and let us know what you're thinking. We'd love to get those questions answered on the air. Thanks. Tim, till next time.
Always a pleasure, John. Thank you, bud.